Hello, and welcome to today's KeyShot webinar. Today we're going to be talking about making an animation, like what you see here, an exploded view. We'll talk a little bit about the emissive effect going on in there, and we'll deal with some materials, some labels, but mostly we'll talk about dealing with animations, keeping everything organized, that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to give it a minute to let everyone join in, and then we'll get underway. Alright, let's get started. By the way, my name is Jeff McCartney. I know our newsletter said we would have Brian Townsend on today, but taken over for him last minute as we ended up sending him out to Vegas for Autodesk University, since he is sort of our Maya guy around here. So the nice thing about that is what you're going to be seeing today is will be very sort of natural in that this is really the first time I've even dealt with the model we're going to deal with. So this is straight out of GrabCAD, and I'm going to just be sort of going at it the way you would with a brand new model. You know, this isn't in any way a canned and prepared webinar. By the way, I am alone here today, so I'm going to keep an eye on my questions, and so let me know if there's any problems, if the audio isn't good, if the video isn't good, anything like that. Let me know in the questions, and I'll check those every now and then. Alright, so let's get into this thing. I'm going to open up KeyShot 3 here. Alright. So before I bring in the fresh model, I will show you what Brian did make. This one probably is it here. So this is a nice little thing we did here with KeyShot 3. It used to be we'd get a lot of questions about people trying to open an old file, a BIP file, and they notice their lighting changed and cameras don't seem right. And what it seemed to be almost always was that people were using the import button to open a BIP. And that was doing an actual import of the data from within that BIP into the current scene. So now when you drag and drop or use the import on a BIP, you get this default option of actually open the file, don't import the file, and you get a little description of what that is. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and open the file. All right. So let me just make sure everything's good to go here on the GoToMeeting. Trying to avoid, we've had technical difficulties the last couple of times, so I want to just make sure we're okay. So we have our, let's see if we have animations here. Alright, so this looks like it's from the quick tip where we showed how to do duplicates of animated models. But this is basically, we're going to be doing one of these, and you can kind of see here, we'll be breaking out these individual parts, taking screws, and you can see all of the animations that we'll be dealing with here. So that's what we have in store for us. Alright. Okay. Let's open up a nice fresh scene of KeyShot here, and we're going to import the model. So let's just make sure we get the right model. Of course, I can go in here, I can say import, browse to it, I can go file, import, or I can go in here, find my assembly file. looks like this one here, and just drag and drop. And since this is a first import, we just get the simple import settings menu. Nothing too advanced. Since this is from Creo, I believe I'll be going with Y up in this case. So let's go ahead and click OK and see what we get. Alright, so now you should be seeing a KeyShot window here open. Just have a report of the screen being frozen. Just let me know if that's the case for anyone else. But if not, we'll just go ahead and continue here. So here's our model, and all right. So let's take a look at how this thing's constructed before we get into materials. So under the models, here in the scene tree, under project, we have the scene tree here. Okay, so this is what we're going to be working with. A couple of things we're going to do. We're going to apply emissive to the, let's just make this a lot bigger here. Going to apply an emissive to the coils. We're going to find our motor in there. We'll just do something basic on that. I'm going to go into performance mode here. What that's going to do is turn off these self shadows that are making it so dark in there. So let's just go into performance mode. Alright, that makes it a little easier to see. So we have the fan blade in there, if you see the outline. We're going to go ahead and do a rotation animation on that eventually. But that gives me an idea of what we're working with. Up top here, we have some labels that we're going to apply, some settings. So, okay, so that sort of gives me an idea of where we're going with this thing. We have screws probably in here, it looks like. All right. Cool. So we can continue here. I'm going to work in this mode. These modes here that I'm shifting through, these you can use. These are full screen and presentation mode. A couple of hotkeys that go along with that. And of course, before I even talk about hotkeys, if you don't already know, if you press K, it gives you a list of all the hotkeys in the software. So that's the K key. Now the presentation mode and full screen modes, that's going to be F for full screen, and presentation mode is going to be Shift F. And you can see presentation mode gets rid of the top bar there. It also gets rid of the toolbar at the bottom, but you can always bring that back by pressing T. And there's your toolbar. You can do that also here in full screen mode with the T key. So there we are. But I'm going to work in just windowed mode like this. All right, put that over here. And we're going to now deal with some materials. So, of course, I can do that from the library. While I'm dealing with materials, I might want to turn off the performance mode so that I get a little bit better representation of what the material actually looks like. So let's go into the material library here. And let's do some paints on the outside. Maybe some metallic paints. What are our basic colors here? Just start with a white on here and a gray over here. Maybe a blue. All right, and we'll go in here and edit those in a little bit. And then we can just right-click, hide part, right-click, hide part. Gets us to the internals here. Now, here's a little thing about the way the new material library works. You no longer deal with linking and unlinking and all that kind of stuff only through the scene tree. You can actually deal with it as by thinking of materials that are in the scene as sort of their own objects. And you can really see it that way if you look at under the material tab here, and you see you have this actual internal material library. So these are all the materials that are in use in this scene. So let me show all parts here. Now I have this white material, so I can double click that. So I could rename this to outer housing or something like that, but we'll leave it as it is for now. And so that's going to be this material here. And so the thing about this is if I apply this to another surface, I'm still only using this one material. And what that means is when I edit this material, or I double click on either one of these surfaces, it's pulling up this material. So if I close this, double click here, pulls up metallic white 1. Pull it up from here, same material. So I applied it to these two parts, but it's still one material, which means if you think about it in KeyShot 2 terminology, that they're linked. So now when I make a change, it applies to both. So now if we look at it this way, let's say, well, one little thing you can do here, let's say I want these two separate. Well, I can just right-click on one of them and unlink material. And you can see it actually makes a duplicate of that material. Then I can edit both of them individually, and you can see their names are instanced here. So now I can make this one a different color. But now take a look at what happens when we drag and drop materials from the library. Let's take this black, put it onto one surface, that creates one black material. Put it onto another surface, and actually from the library, it doesn't create groups automatically. As you apply individual materials to individual surfaces from the external library, it creates new duplicates of that material. So if you want to create a group, what I like to do is take one material, apply it, and then either open up the internal material library by going to Project, going to Material, or you can source it from here, and then drag and drop that onto here. And you can see that got rid of, that black is no longer in use, so it's gone from the library. The other way you can apply this material is with the standard Shift left click, Shift right click. If I hold down Shift and left click on this surface here, and then hold down Shift and right click on this surface here, it's going to apply that green material, and it's still going to be just one instance of that green material. And so now when it's edited, all of those things change. So now you can kind of think of it, comparing it to KeyShot 2, it's as though linking materials is the default behavior. And we found that to be more often what's desired. If you were going to paint the same material, you probably want them linked. But it's not hard to unlink them. Let's say I want to start with this color here on this knob, but I know I'm going to edit it in some way. Well, I can hold down Shift, left click to select this material for painting, and then hold down Shift and Control and right click to paint a duplicate of that material. Now when I edit this material, it is its own material, and I can now edit it. So you can also do all these things without the hotkeys. You can right-click, select material, right-click, apply selected material, and that will basically do the linked behavior. Or you can right-click, select material, right-click, apply copy of material, and that will give you a copy that can be edited on its own. So that's sort of the basics of kind of what changed in the way you deal with materials. So far we have pretty much only positive feedback on that, but if you do have concerns with how this works, let us know so that we can try to adjust it to make everyone happy. Alright, so let's make these materials actually look nice. I'm going to go with the gray here. Oh, here's another interesting point. You'll notice when I apply materials from the library here, it actually applies to the entire sort of material group that you created in the internal library. So if you want to be able to apply something from the external library only to one of these parts, we're going to want to go in there first and unlink the material. Now I can put a white here. I might just do that here as well. Unlink material. And now I can put a blue here, and going to put a gray up here. And just because I know in the future I'm going to ungroup this, let's just go ahead and unlink that and unlink that. All right, maybe we'll just put a white here and copy that over to here. And now these two, as I just got done talking about, are linked because I just did the standard shift left, shift right. All right, let's see if there's anything interesting to... Okay. All right, so the questions I can get to so far, the questions I won't get to for a little while. I see some of them are some pretty long questions there that I will have to address sort of at the end of this whole thing. So let's go ahead and deal with these materials a little bit. So I'm going to just double click on this paint, and I'm going to lessen the blue a little bit, maybe something like that. And also, let's take a look at what environment we're using. We have this default studio environment here. I'm going to set it to 1. This is the default, right? So this is what it's going to look like when you first import things. Now, the startup environment is in here because it's sort of a, it's sort of just a legacy thing with KeyShot 2. We wanted it to look the same when we first opened it, but to be honest, the startup environment isn't all that well calibrated to make white look white. You can see it's pretty blown out, and if we look at the material, it is pure white. So maybe if we backed this down a little bit, it'd start to look a little better. But honestly, startup is the startup environment's not necessarily the best for material evaluation. But the good news is I definitely tried to give you a lot of environments that do provide a little bit better evaluation for these materials. So you can see an environment like this, much less blown out. You can actually see details in all the surfaces here. If we zoom out, this is a nice little room with some panels up top. It gives you this line along here gives you a nice little reflection, so you can actually tell what's shiny and what's not. So that is a nice one to use. These other ones, the ones with a sort of floor, you can see here we have this ramp in here. This is kind of a cool environment because it's sort of simulates what you might do with a light studio, where you have this this tent, and then behind your product you put a ramp, and you can rotate your environment so that the ramp kind of falls behind your object, and it actually provides sort of a natural gradient for you, and that also depends on your focal length. So if I change my focal length here, I'm going to get more or less of that ramp in the background due to the perspective. So, and there's a really nice new hotkey. Alt, Shift, right click, and drag will change the perspective of your image without it, and it basically is doing what's called a zolly, where it's zooming and changing the distance at the same time. So you're dollying in or out and zooming the lens, so you get this just change in perspective. It's a cool little feature there. All right. So those are my basic outside casing materials. Maybe I'll just copy this white onto there. That's all good. Hide the parts. Let's take a look at the inside here. So these screws here, we can take a look at how they're grouped. They might actually come in with the material already applied to them. Let's take a look at the scene tree. So we have heater screw. So it looks like these are all using the same material. So if we look over here, heater screw, if we change these, okay, so these all change together. So these are all grouped, which is nice because now when I go in here and just grab a metal, let's just put a aluminum, basic, rough. See, this applies to all of those screws. Now, of course, if I wanted to, I can go to one of these screws, can right-click on it, and I can say unlink, and that'll make that screw a unique screw that I can change the material on. Because, as you can see here, you have each of these screws as individual elements in the scene tree. Even though they all use the same material, you can always go in and unlink them. If they're one element in the scene tree, then you have to go back to your modeling software to further separate faces or bodies, or something has to be done to break up the grouping a little bit more. But in this case, we have all the screws as individual elements, but it's nice because they're all using the same material, so it makes painting them much easier. All right, let's also put aluminum. Let's just start with polished on the fan blade here. All right. And I'm just going to hide things as I paint them, not move things. Let's go with hide this time. And let's just take a look here. We have light materials in here somewhere. Where did we put those? Light, probably under light. So let's just start with warm light, and we'll leave that on there for now. We're going to make that more of a red glow later, but I'm just going to hide that now. You can see it painted on both of these, which is good. Let's hide the part, and let's go back to metal, aluminum basic. Let's just put rough on most of this stuff. Let's do another. Actually, see, and this is a case where I'm going to want to create a grouping here, so I'm going to just start copying and pasting these on here. Get all these pieces here. Make sure they're all painted. There we go. Maybe just throw that on there as well. And let's just put a gloss black paint on the motor there. See what's on here. Metallic paint white, that's that outer face. And maybe some sort of soft touch black down here. Alright, let's do a show all, see what we have. Show all parts. Okay, there's our basic setup there. Let's just take a look. Now, one little hotkey that I am happy to have now is a hotkey for turning on global illumination, and that's the I key. So hit that, and you'll see this emissive is starting to illuminate this a little bit. But what's nice is I can still go into performance mode with Alt-P, and it turns all that stuff off, so I get a nice, quick render. Very easy. And then when I go back out of performance mode, comes back to detailed shadows, detailed indirect illumination, all that stuff is on. All right, let's see here. So I'm going to take a look now. Let's see if there's some questions I can address about materials before I move on to animation. All right. So there's a question about how do you get your KeyShot 2 materials. A lot of the KeyShot 2 materials are actually in the new library as well, and they've been tuned to work a little bit better with some of the changes we made, especially to gamma in the software. But what you can actually do is import your KeyShot 2 libraries. So if you go in here, you can take these MTLs, these are your old KeyShot 2 material libraries, and you can import them into the KeyShot 3 library, and it will create a folder called Migrated, and it will put those materials in there, and it'll go into the MTL and extract all the material information and give you individual materials from your MTL files. And then you can go in, you can make new folders either at the top level here, and then you can drag and drop materials in. So if I wanted to put this black paint into test, then I would be able to do that. In theory. So I can go to color, a solid color background. Thanks, Bill. And let's just see what else we have here. All right, any additional new materials? We are planning on uploading a lot more new materials online because we did implement all this import-export stuff. We can create these, we'll be able to create a lot of materials, select them like this, hit export, and creates these KeyShot material package files. We're going to post those online for you guys to download, which you'll then just click import, browse to it, and bring that material package in there. All right, so let's see. We'll get back to some questions again later. And I see some of you are itching to get to animation, so let's just go for it. Before I do that, though, I just want to make this more of a glowing red sort of deal. Maybe not quite red, but more orange. Something in there. Something like that. All right. Okay. So we're gonna do a couple of things. We're gonna do a whole rotation of the model while it's exploding and the fan spinning. So we can start by, let's just set up the exploded view. That way we don't have to deal with looking at it while things are, rotating around. Of course, we can always turn things on and off, but we'll just keep it simple. We'll start with the exploded view. So I'm going to go into performance mode just because I like to be able to work a little quicker, navigate a little quicker, and not wait for the shadows to res up. And we're going to do this a couple of ways. I can go into the scene tree, and I can see all my parts here. And see, and this toolbar is kind of designed to lead you through the workflow of KeyShot. So if we go by that, animation, we click this. This is the next step in the workflow. And you can, of course, actually animate from here by using the animation wizard. So I can actually keep my project window closed here and click animation wizard. And basically I just go in here, and if I want to set a translation on this outer part here, what I want to do then is click translation. And this is going to be, of course, the basis of our exploded view is several translations. So we'll click next, go into our heater assembly here, and we have our shell front. And you can see, it might be a little subtle on the web meeting here, but there's this outline that shows you what you have selected. So we're going to select shell front, click next, and immediately it pops up a chunk of animation that you can scrub through or play through to see what that animation looks like. What I like to do is set it to the end of that animation and then just go in here and set my sliders. So I can see it's not the y-axis that I want to translate on, but it might be the x, but it's not the x. So let's just reset that to 0. Oops, I hit enter on accident. So here, let me just go back through that quickly. All right. So it's not going to be the y. It's not going to be the x. So it's probably going to be the z. And let's just, since we want to keep things consistent, let's set this to something like 2, maybe even 1. There's actually an interesting trick you can apply, but let's just start with pulling this out 1 unit. And then you have ease in, ease out. Now, ease in, ease out is dealing with the acceleration of the animation. So if you have ease in and ease out enabled, the animation is going to accelerate out of a stop and decelerate into the end. If you have it set to linear, then the animation is going to go a constant speed from start to finish. So that'll usually result in a little bit of an unnatural speed because you can't really just start and stop instantly. So we're going to go with ease in and ease out on this one. All right, so we'll click finish there. So that's how you use the wizard. Of course, there's camera animations in here, and you can see these little previews of what kind of animations these are. But when you really get into KeyShot, you're not going to really use the wizard all that much. It's kind of a beginner's thing. So to speed up the workflow a little bit, it's going to be better to go over here into the scene tree and just find your elements and animate them through right-click. So, and of course we can always go in here and edit these as well. So if I wanted to pull this a little further away, I can click my animation in the scene tree and move it some more. But let's just leave it at 1 for now. And if there's anything else I want to move the same amount, I can do a couple of things. I can actually copy this animation with the right click, copy. And then I can go down to, let's say, this foot here, and I can actually paste it. But I have two options. I can paste or I can paste a linked. If I paste the animation, then it's going to become a new element in the timeline that I can edit separately. If I paste a linked animation, it's actually going to stay as just one animation that is applied to these two different elements. And that's actually really nice for organization. So I'm going to do that again here, paste linked animation. So now these feet will move with the front casing here. I'm going to take this animation and call it front casing translation. Alright, and you can see these linked animations, they get a little icon that tells them they are in fact linked. Okay, so maybe we'll go 2 units out on this one because we need to pull out the blade here, and so let's pull the blade out 1 unit. So I'm going to click the blade. That brings me to that element in the scene tree. I'm going to right click, and I can speed this up a little bit, but I already have the animation on here copied. So why don't I just go ahead and click on my fan blade, and instead of pasting a link, I'm just going to paste the animation this time. So you can see now it gives me 2 animations instead of just linking them up. Now here's an interesting problem that we can identify and work with. And what you see here is really intuitively these should be moving the same because it technically is the same kind of animation. But animations are dependent on the local space of the individual parts. So if we take a look at this animation here, we see that it is translating on the Z, but if you look at here, we have axis orientation set to original local, which means we're looking at the local translation of this. And this problem that this is going in a different direction tells us that in the modeling software, this thing's Z axis is pointing this way, while this part's Z-axis is pointing this way. And because we're dealing with local axes, we get that difference. We can always change it to global, and then things will work the same no matter what. And you can see that's the case now. This is going in there with that part. Or the other option is leave it on local and just change the axis. So let's see what we have here. Looks like it's actually going to be the y-axis in this case that lines up properly. So I'm going to pull the y out to 1 unit on the fan blade. So there we go. And let's rename this fan blade translation. All right. So now we have these translations. We can just go in and use them on other things. Maybe I don't necessarily want to explode the little hub here from the fan blade, so I could copy and select this, paste linked, and now here's a very interesting application of this problem. Even when these animations are linked, their local axes matter. So this really means we need to go in here and set it to global so that these things ignore their original local axes and just deal with KeyShot axes. So let's just set this to Z1. Hope that's making sense. And you can see what the KeyShot axis system looks like by going to View and going to Coordinate Legend. And so now you can see how these things that are moving on the global Z are in line with this Z-axis here. All right. So let's pull the back casing away, and we're going to send it the other way. But now there's 2 parts here, it looks like. So let's take a look at what these 2 parts are. Okay, it's this little disc. So in this case, I'm going to go up a level to here so I move both at the same time. Add a translation. And this one is probably going to be negative Z. So negative, let's do 2, and add a negative to that. So there we are. All right. And let's see here. Maybe up here, let's take a look at we have the heater control panel, and then we probably have these knobs here as well. So heater control knobs. So there's two of these knobs. So let's pull the panel up. Let's do a translation Y1. That looks good. And on the knobs, let's do a translation Y2. So that'll pull the knob a little further. Actually, let's just do 1.5. And see, now I want the same translation. So let's call this knob translation. I'm going to copy that one and paste it onto that other knob. Paste, linked, and now those will move together. Alright, so that's all done. Now one thing I have so far ignored is the screws. So probably want to pull out the screws first, of course, so that if we're actually disassembling this thing. But what I'm doing here is just setting all of the movements without any regard for how their order or anything like that. I'm going to go in and set durations and orders later. But let's make sure we at least get a translation applied to these screws. And so we have, let's take a look at what we have here. If I just select these one by one, I can see from their highlights where they are. So the top 4, top 5, top 6. So these top 6, I want to have the same animation applied. So I'm just going to start with 1, add translation, and let's see which way. Probably not the Y. It's probably going to be the Z, and it's probably going to need to be negative. And we can't really see anything until we are at the end of the translation. So let's see where that went. That's not exactly right, so maybe it is actually the Y. We can just play with these sliders. Yeah, so in this case it is actually the Y. So I'm just going to do 3 on the Y. You see that brings it to there. So maybe I'll actually go to something like 3.5, maybe even 4. So that's pretty nice there. All right. So now let's give this a good name. All right, and we're just going to copy. Now so let's just do copy, of course, and then we'll just paste linked, paste linked, paste linked, and paste one more and one more. So there we are. Okay. All right, so let's look at what else we have. Now these feet, we want these to come out with this. So I'm going to go up to my shell here, take this. So this is rear shell translation. That gives me a better name, and then I'm going to copy and apply it to these feet. Paste linked and paste linked. Now here's a cool thing. You can of course have multiple animations on things. So even though these feet move out with this, one thing I can do that might be kind of cool is take all of these feet now. So this one, let's just start with. I'm going to add its own translation to it. And this translation I'm going to bring down -1. So this is going to explode it away from the base while still moving with the base during its movement. So there's our, let's call this the foot translation. And now I'm going to copy it and apply it to the other feet. So heater foot, paste linked, one more, and one more. So now let's look at that result here. Okay, so that's kind of cool. And of course we can always go in and mess with the timing of these things later. Right now everything's happening at the same time, which could be cool, but might not be the result you want. Alright, so now let's pull the coils away. So let's select one coil here. So we have coil 1, coil 2. So I'm just going to translate. And actually there's a whole subassembly here for these coils, but we're not gonna do anything with just that. We'll just go into the coil level. All right, so not on the Y. Really, we want it on the negative Z. So let's just do negative 1.5, and then on this other coil, I don't want it to move exactly with the first coil, so I'm just going to give it its own coil translation 1. And maybe I'll just copy it, but I'm not going to link paste it this time. I'm just going to paste it so that it gives me a starting point, but I can just go in here and now back it off 0.5. So of course I could go in and separate all these bands and everything, but let's just progress with this, because we do not have all day. So let's take a look at this movement. So that's pretty cool. Now, what I'm going to start with doing is I have all these animations, and that's all well and good. I can go in here and slide these around. But what I'm going to first do is add these to a folder. Right-click, add to folder, and this is going to be my explode apt folder. So now I can take this whole folder and just, oh, okay. Well, so there's a KeyShot crash. That's pretty nice. All right. Well, I'm not going to go through all that again. And after the meeting, I will have to put KeyShot on timeout and figure out, give it time to think about what it's done. But we'll get that figured out. Something obviously with the folders. But this is why we have, it's like a cooking show. I have one already in the oven here. So this one's done, and we'll just continue with it. So let's go with maybe, I don't know, let's try this one. So I'm just going to open this. No, not that one. Did I just do the same one? I think I did. Let's do this one. Now there's those nice labels. All right, let's take a look at our animations here, make sure we have everything. No, we do not. All right, third try is a charm here. Okay, so this is kind of, the end point of where we were. So let's just take a look here. We have expand. So this is what we just created. I'm going to turn everything but the expand off. And of course these check boxes are pretty nice for doing that. You can just turn things on and off like that. Now see, what I was trying to do was show you that after you make a folder, you can grab this and just drag it around to change its timing. I'm just going to bring that to the beginning here. Okay. So now within this expanded folder, I'm going to go back to performance mode just because I like it. You can see all these individual translations, and you can see in Brian's file he's done some of the retiming. But if we just reset this kind of stuff here, so this is sort of what we were left off with. These are all equal timed. Now, if you need everything perfectly equally timed, you can always go in, double-click, and open up the properties, and you can zero out things like duration. And then now we're completely equal. So let's play with some timing. So we have everything kind of even now. But let's say we want to bring the screws out first. So I might leave the screws here, move everything else out a little bit further. So really I could start by just bringing these things out here. Okay, so now the screws come out. But before they come all the way out, we only want them to get out to maybe about here before the next thing starts coming out. So this will be the rear. Let's see which one this is. All right, so it looks like that's the rear. So we're going to bring the screws out to about here, and I'm going to use that time marker to pull the next thing out. And the screws, I might want to, maybe something to try is kind of match up their end point with when this thing comes to a stop. So that's kind of interesting looking. And then we can go in here and work on the other things. So maybe at about the same time, I might want the front casing to come out. So let's bring this to about the same. So that's nice. And when these sort of reveal the inside, then we'll want maybe the blade to start, so about there, and then the coils maybe just a little after that. Let's see what that looks like. So we have the first coil come out, then the other, and there we are. So that's pretty nice. But you can see how you can just kind of play with timing, but I like to sort of strategically overlap things and use my time indicator to bump up the animations to that time indicator to determine my overlaps. All right, so there's our exploded animation. Now, what we want to do is, while this is animating, exploding out like this, we might want to spin the whole model around. Well, we can do that very easily. We just right-click on the entire model, and we can add a turntable. And so now, while that's expanding, it's also rotating. The nice thing about the folder is I can leave my, let me just delete these other animations, since we're going to basically do these things again. All right. So now I can change my, let's have it start the turntable first. So I'm going to move my folder over. You can see how that moves all these things together, which is really handy. We'll work on camera framing later. So there we go. Now the other thing we definitely want to do is have, from the very beginning, we're going to want, really the first thing we're going to have it do is start the fan blade spinning. So I'm going to move everything down a second, and if we go back to the beginning of time here, I can move my time indicator, my start of the work area bar back to 0. I'm going to go in here, find the fan blade. Well, I can just click on it. In theory, there we are. So there's my fan blade, and we'll want to just add a rotation to it. So if I show only on my fan blade, show only, let's take a look at the behavior of that rotation. So this is actually pretty interesting. The default settings aren't going to work on this fan blade. I remember from how this was set up in the part file that it needs to be a Y-axis to spin around the right thing, but you can see, especially if I add some, I'm just going to say times 10 here on my rotation, it's going to give me 900 degrees. I'm going to stretch this out 10 seconds or so. So you can see that wobble. So that just means the center point of this thing is not right for the rotation we want. So what we want in this case is actually the origin, because the person that modeled this modeled out from this center point here. So now, well, we have a little translation applied to it as well, of course. So let me just turn this off. All right, so now you can see it just spins perfectly around its center. But compare that to the center-based, and the model is slightly misshapen such that the center doesn't quite correspond with what you would think. Now, of course, the other option is to give it a helper object, but I'm not sure this model has a suitable helper object, so I'd have to go in and add one. But luckily for us, we have a nice origin that gives us a perfect rotation. So on this rotation, let's take a look. We're going to definitely want ease in, ease out, so we'll just leave it like that. I'm going to do a show all, and that'll bring back everything. So now, when we start the animation, the fan blade will start spinning. I might just want to make that spin faster, because over 10 seconds, 900 degrees isn't all that much. So maybe do times 2. That'll maybe another times 2. And I like using the little calculator in the value boxes here, because I just think it's cool. But of course, you can go in here and just spin this around as much as you want. But you can do things like times pi. It's just kind of cool. All right, let's do 360 times, I don't know, Let's just do 3600. That's probably fine. Yeah, that looks like a nice rate. All right, so there's our sort of basic rotation. And so there we go. So now to do the collapse that you see happening here, it's just what we did for the expand in reverse. And what's nice about it is I'm just going to send this one this way, and we'll do a new one. I can take these, and I can find this in the scene tree, so it's right here. And basically all it is copy it, select it, paste it, then instead of calling it expand, call it collapse, and then add a negative, and there you go. So that's all you have to do on all those individual parts to create your collapse. And so you can see that's exactly what Brian has done here in this collapse folder. So let's just bring that into play here, and I'm going to delete the new one I made. We'll just bring this back. So we have a turntable. So let's just tune this up a little bit. All right. Okay. So there we go. So, of course, this is part one of this whole thing. So we'll get more into some details. I believe we'll be doing it next week, but maybe it'll wait a little longer than that. I'm not exactly sure. But let me just take a minute to address some of your questions at the end of the meeting here. All right. So how did I get rid of the fan wobble? Just again, that was the fan wobble was coming from the default rotation method is based on an automatically generated center point. You know, we draw basically a bounding box around the thing and create a center point, and that's the default. But that doesn't always work. So if we look at this rotation on this fan, when it's set to center, the default here for pivot point, it wobbles. And that's because it just isn't quite perfect. So if we set it to origin, the origin is actually coming from the modeling software. And so the person that made this set a point, made sure that they modeled out from the origin. You know, they used this, they probably based this circle on that origin and they built out from there. So in this case, the origin works really well. I can take a look here, and let's just, I mean, really if you have anything that works as a helper object, that's the other solution, because you don't always model out from the origin, of course. So let's just take a look here if we have something that we can use as a helper object, because that's a really nifty way of doing this. So let me just hide this part. So if we look in the scene tree, see something like this could really work well for a helper object. So let's take a look. If we take the fan blade and we look at its rotation animation, so center we know doesn't work. You can see how far off that is. But now if we say pick and we go in here and find, maybe was it the connector? Coils sub, spacer now. So really this circle over there could work because it's probably perfect, but it's this pin that we really want to use. So let's say OK, and look at that, it snaps right into place, and now that wobble's gone. So that's the idea with the helper object. These screws here, these could use, we could go in and duplicate and link the animation onto these screws as well, but we won't worry about that. So to add negative, when creating a collapse animation, again, what I like to do is just, here, let's just do a very quick thing out here. So let's say I have this knob, right, and I add a translation, and it moves up on the Y, and this is called knob expand. Now, to create a, let's just move this out here. So there's my expand. Very simple to create a collapse. And we will, of course, in the 3.1 and 3.2, give you some more automatic features of automatically, collapse this, mirror this, duplicate an entire folder, all that kind of stuff. We have big plans for it. But right now, in sort of the first state that this animation system is in, what you would do is right-click, copy, and actually there's even a better shortcut. Hold down Control, and then drag and drop the animation onto any other part, and that'll create a copy. So there you are, expand to, and I'm going to call this now collapse, and go to the value here, put in a negative, hit enter, and there's your collapse. So expand, collapse. But like I said, we have plans for like a mirror, reverse, that kind of stuff. So there's lots more to come with the whole KeyShot 3 thing. Let's see here. We're going to have a clear image while it rotates. So the reason, so KeyShot, of course, is real-time rendering. So as we're moving around here and as we play this, it isn't exactly perfectly clear, and that's because it's re-rendering in real time everything as it moves. So if you want a better view of this, the first thing you can do is click Preview, and that will do a render of the actual frames and give you a frame-for-frame, higher quality preview of what the thing looks like. But if you want, full final output, then what you do is, let me just let this run for a second, and I'll review questions here for a sec. Question about transparency, animate transparency. We have some plans. It's harder than it sounds because transparency in the ray tracer. Does it refract? How does it blend with colors? It's kind of a weird thing to do. Really, what you have to do is render two scenes, on both sides of the transparency, and then blend them. And doing that all in real time, the animation is tricky, but something that definitely is on our to think about list. All right, so we don't need to let that render forever, but you can see this now plays back at a nicer quality and a frame-for-frame rate, so good real time. So the label thing is going to have to wait for next week, but we'll definitely cover that. You can see here there's a question about that, these labels. But of course, I believe we have tutorials on the labels and everything. And there should be new ones for KeyShot 3. But also more on the output. To do the final quality output, that's going to go through the render tab here, go to animation mode, and here's where you dial in the resolution of the animation, what kind of format video you want. Do you also want frames? What format? The TIFF includes transparency, JPEG does not. And then you go into quality. You can choose how you want to output. And actually, for animations, probably the best bet is the maximum samples mode. And the reason for that is a sample is the renderer checking each pixel for color accuracy. So between frames, you really ideally want every pixel checked the same amount. And that's because you want any visible noise, if you have a rough material that has that sort of noisy graininess that gives it that rough look, you want that noise to be the same between each frame. And by telling it to only ever check for 32 or 64 or 16 samples on every frame, that guarantees you the same sort of noise, the same level. Some frames that are easier to render if you set them to maximum time. If you give an easy frame 5 minutes to render and a hard frame 5 minutes to render, that hard frame to render is going to be noisier over 5 minutes. So really, to get a perfectly even result frame for frame, you want to use maximum samples. Then advanced control is kind of the old-fashioned offline render, as it's called, and it'll produce really good quality, and you won't notice flicker. But in order to really not notice flicker, you have to make sure you have enough global illumination quality. So you might even have to bump that up to around 3 if you're going to try to use that. So if you're